Now, detonate the reality bomb!
I will build a great, great wall.
Some alien race to come down and threaten us.
Is the singularity near?
The truth is out there.
The military-industrial complex.
The 7 mountains of the influencers of culture.
To be as gods, you know.
Change has come to America.
Catapult of propaganda.
From a secure location on top of the ridge in the heart of the beautiful Missouri Ozarks, this is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
The evidence is there in the sand and in the stones if we would but only look. God has not called you and me to a blind faith. Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Joining me is a gentleman whose work I've been aware of for some time. I've, I think, cited his work in 3 books now, and I probably mention it just about every time I give a talk, especially when the subject gets around to Moses and the Exodus. His work was also featured in a film that we highlighted back in March. We interviewed the filmmaker, Timothy Mahoney, the film Patterns of Evidence, the Moses Controversy, which leaned very heavily on some very exciting research done by our guest on the writings of Moses, and more specifically, what he used to write. He's the author of the book, The World's Oldest Alphabet. He's a professor of biblical history and exegesis at the Bible Seminary in Katy, Texas. It is our honor to welcome Dr. Douglas Petrovich to the program for the first time. Doug, thanks for joining us tonight.
My pleasure, Derek. It's good to be with you.
We were talking before the program here just how fascinating history is, and especially how the evidence that archaeologists have been finding in the lands of the Bible, how exciting it is when you start comparing that to the biblical record and realize that it affirms the history that we read in Scripture. When during your academic career did you realize that this was going to be your calling?
Oh, that's a great question. I suppose where it all came together the most is the 10 years that I was in Siberia, Russia. We were invited there to help found a Christian seminary from scratch, working with a pretty widespread church there. They had about 1,500 churches. It was a Baptist denomination there in Russia. I wasn't Baptist, going over to the CIS, but I was glad to work with them. And while I was there, and we set up the seminary, then we launched it, and it was, I think, 8 years that it was running. And during those 8 years, I taught a lot of different courses. I think it was around 30 to 35. I'm now, I think, over 40 different courses that I've taught. But really, it was fun because we were so small and we had to wear so many hats. I got to teach in a lot of different areas, in pastoral ministry, in Bible exposition, in biblical languages, which was one of my favorites, of course. And in putting all that together, and I actually was invited to be the leader of the team. So I became the academic dean, which meant I got to write the curriculum.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, that's a pretty amazing thing when you get to sit down with a blank sheet of paper and just write out a curriculum for a Master of Divinity program. And in that, I was convinced that we needed to have something physically there, tangibly there for our students to study biblical history, because I'm committed to a view. It's essentially a hermeneutical view, which means answers the question how we interpret the Bible. It's a view that's that combines 2 elements. It's a grammatical historical method of interpretation. And if we think that, if we're convinced that that's true, the grammatical historical method, that means we have to study the grammar of the biblical text. And for us, that means, as educators in the biblical languages, and teach those. Then what about the second half, the historical part? If we believe that the biblical text is the result of certainly the interplay between the Spirit of God and certain men who are called to write, but if they were writing this inspired text, they were writing from a certain place at a certain time. They were committed to a certain culture. They had certain cultural commitments and moral positions, and yet they would have been, as we were talking about before the show, influenced by the religions and other people around them. So if that all is true, then really the message that's being communicated in the form of the Bible is centered or couched in a historical moment. And if that's the case, then the writer is going to be betraying his commitments and his understandings to all of those things. And so it behooves us to understand that better. And so during that whole time I was in Siberia teaching for those 8 years at the seminary and teaching these different areas, I was the one who taught the Old Testament history course. I taught the New Testament history course. And as I was studying and all of that, it became so fun, so fascinating because of my love for history and my love for the Bible that I realized, looking at the literature that's out there, the Christian scholars who write and other scholars who write, I realized that this entire field of biblical history is just, it's what I used to call a field that's white for harvest. And I realized that I could make, with God's help, I could make a significant impact in this field. And I really could count on one hand or two at the most, but probably one hand, the number of scholars who were well trained in both the biblical languages and in ancient history, who then, of course, were the ones making significant contributions. And I thought, if I can become trained better in history, I could do that. So, after we finished those 10 years there, we moved to Toronto, and I went to the University of Toronto, did a PhD in Syro-Palestinian archaeology with a first minor in Egyptology, or specifically ancient Egyptian language, and a second minor in ancient Near Eastern religions. So that's when it all came together for me.
That's you're hitting all the buttons here, because this is all the stuff that I, as a layperson, find absolutely fascinating. And again, as we mentioned before we started recording, it all started with Exodus 14 and reading that sentence that's that God told Moses, turn back. Like, what? Because until that point, in starting this Bible study with my wife years ago, we had, or at least I had, observed a lot of more theology than I care to admit from pop culture, which is not a good way to come up with your personal code of ethics and worldview, because there are eternal consequences to that. When you began then digging into the work that is out there and that's available to lay people like me, where did you see the biggest gaps, the biggest voids that need to be filled?
Well, it's funny, Derek. I guess you could say I kind of just stumbled into one after another. The first area where I stumbled into was this whole question of the issues related to the Exodus, right? Because that was one of the biggest criticisms in my university courses that I took at various places I studied. The biblical text wasn't taken very seriously. It's just, it's a bunch of stories that are meant to impress Hebrew youth of this glorious past that they never had. And that always bothered me, of course. And I knew that that's not how the Bible was written. So really, that's kind of what switched everything for me.
It is surprising that even prominent Israeli archaeologists consider the story of the Exodus just a myth that's told to justify the nation of Israel. What is it about the evidence that convinces you that the Exodus actually happened?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of study that had to go into matters that prepare you to compare what we read about in the text to the actual ancient history, to Egyptology and all we've learned in the area of Egyptian history. And but go back and give me the question again so I can get
what is it about you? What evidence is there that convinces you that the Exodus really, because you've got these experts and some of them are Israelis. You'd assume they'd have a vested interest in saying, oh yes, this is where we come from. And they say, nah, it never happened. We just emerged from the Canaanite tribes who were already here.
So when you get some of the things right, I think, that prepare you for this study, for this comparison of Israelite versus Egyptian history, such as the chronology, then you can start to synchronize correctly the actual time period described in the Bible versus the time period itself in Egyptian history. So it was a number of things. First of all, I studied intensively the background of the biography of the Exodus Pharaoh, and I saw that a lot of the requirements of the Exodus Pharaoh weren't met by anyone within the 13th century BC, which is known as the late Exodus view. And, there's no king that meets all these important requirements. For example, the Exodus Pharaoh has to be the successor, and usually that means he has a father who was on the throne for over 40 years. That's very clear from the biblical text. Well, Ramses II is the main candidate that's proposed as the Exodus Pharaoh. But the truth is that it's he who had a reign of over 40 years. In fact, he's the only Pharaoh of the 19th dynasty to have a reign over 40 years. His father, Seti I, he had a very short reign in comparison, but well short of that requirement. So he can't qualify on that requirement alone. He can't qualify as the Exodus Pharaoh. So that being the case, it's kind of like with the old Israelite prophets. They had to get it right 100% of the time, or they weren't of God. That was God's stipulation. My prophets 100% of the time will communicate the truth. And if they're wrong on anything, they're not from me. Well, I have news for you with the Exodus Pharaoh. If your candidate, if you have a candidate, has 90-something% of all of the requirements, but doesn't get something right, something about his biography doesn't match with what's clear in Scripture, you've got the wrong candidate in your hands. So that's kind of the first element that looking at the biography of Amenhotep II from Dynasty 18, every single one of the requirements I could come up with that would be true of his biography, the Exodus Pharaoh's biography, Amenhotep II met that requirement. And, that's the kind of evidence that just helped me to understand this. But then it got, and that I published an article on this in 2006. It's, I think, the most, from then until now, the most detailed study of the Exodus Pharaoh ever undertaken. Well, in 2012, when I was working on my PhD, actually, I was studying for my comprehensive exams. I stumbled onto a website for the site in the Eastern Nile Delta called Avaris that has amazing archaeological evidence there that connects to the Scripture. There really is actually no other site in the entire ancient Near East that's been excavated more than this site in God's providence. And the entire Austrian nation is funding the project, which of course means you have deep pockets and you can pretty much do everything you want. So they've excavated there for decades now. It's got to be around 50 years or so, if not more. So what has come out of that is it fits perfectly with the correct synchronization between Israelite and Egyptian history to connect the movement of Jacob and his family, and I would date that very confidently to 1876 BC, to Egypt. And this is the kind of evidence that once I realized this is the right site, and you look at the occupations there were Asiatics there from the early part of the 19th century BC, and it fits biblical history to a T. And as I studied all of that out and looked at the epigraphical evidence, and that means ancient writings. Literally, epigraphy means to write on something. And the idea is that it's something different than a document. The document is the typical way of writing, but it's writing on something else. So, you had writing on stone, you had writing on ceramics, bones. I mean, you name it, they would write on it if it was hard enough. And so as I was looking at the Middle Egyptian hieroglyphic inscriptions that are connected with the Asiatic people who live there at that very site, that's biblical Ramses of the end of Genesis and then Exodus 1, all of a sudden you realize, or I realized, that there is enough evidence here to make a conclusive case to identify in Middle Egyptian inscriptions the characters of Joseph, his two eldest sons, Ephraim and Manasseh being the older, one of Manasseh's obscure sons that you only read about in Joshua 17. And then, of course, I stumbled across, and this goes back to my first book, The World's Oldest Alphabet, I stumbled across a use of a letter, a consonantal letter, meaning it's a consonant, and that's all they wrote. The first alphabetic script was fully consonantal, had no vowels. I realized that, number one, that was written by Joseph's son Manasseh, believe it or not.
Wow.
And number two, he referred to the people that he was a part of. There were 6 people who went down to a site in Sinai called Serebit el-Khadim. And at Serebit el-Khadim, they extracted turquoise on not every year, but more or less annual mining expeditions. It was a lucrative industry. So the Israelites were a part of that from early on. And on this caption to a drawing that Manasseh made using his Egyptian name, which means he who was disfavored. That's the meaning of his Egyptian name.
Oh,
he
really?
Was disfavored.
Because Jacob crossed his hands and blessed Ephraim instead of Manasseh, gave Ephraim the blessing of the elder.
Exactly.
Wow.
And wouldn't you know it, in the ancient world, you don't get names at birth. You get it when something in life distinguishes you as being connected to that name. So whatever his name was before then, from that moment, he became he who was disfavored, because that was a crucial moment in his life.
Yeah.
It's a bizarre thing. Well, in this caption that he wrote, so the drawing it's of himself sitting on a donkey. He's seated on a donkey, and he has a whipping stick, I guess you could call it. And there's a young man to his left and a young man to his right. And actually, there are 5 or 6 inscriptions where you have the same caption at the bottom of the stela being 8 to 9 feet high. And it looks like a kind of an expanded version of an old tombstone from the 19th century. Well, at the base of each one of these 5 or 6, he drew himself seated on a donkey and this young man and this other young man. And he had different captions all the time. In one, he named himself and named his title. And in another, he named his attendants, who were essentially his servants, his helpers, who had Egyptian names. And then one time he named the boy that's on the right in the image, and that's his son, Shechem, from Joshua 17.
Oh,
a Semitic name. Very odd on such an inscription. But in one of those captions, probably the last one that he inscribed, it reads this way: 6 Levantines, meaning people from the Levant. The Levant consists of the southern Levant, which we know of as different names: Israel, Canaan, Palestine, the Holy Land, whatever you want to call it. And then the northern Levant, which is Phoenicia, ancient Phoenicia on the coast, on the western coast of Asia there. And then above it, Syria. So all of that strip is known as the Levant in the ancient world. The Egyptians had to work for its retinue. Anybody from retinue is a Levantine person, either southern Levant or northern Levant. For them, it's all the same. But what he wrote on this caption was 6 Levantines, 6 people from the Levant. And then it says Hebrews of Bethel, the beloved. And in the word Hebrews, the B sound is not represented by a hieroglyph, a typical, what you would expect in an otherwise Middle Egyptian hieroglyphic inscription, or in this case, caption. But instead, it was a protoconsonantal letter. And I saw it right from the beginning. And actually, there's one other, what we call pictograph. So hieroglyphics are all pictographs. They're pictures. They're written pictures, and they're representing something. Well, one of the other pictographs was a Canaanite syllabic. And, of course, I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't know what the other non-hieroglyph was. So I consulted a Western Semiticist my father's age, and he said, oh, that's easy. He said, this one is a Canaanite syllabic, and this one is a protoconsonantal letter. And I said, okay, well, what is a protoconsonantal letter, and what is a Canaanite syllabic? So he had to catch me up on 200 years of scholarship by pointing me to all of the right sources to read. And sure enough, I did it. I was supposed to be studying for my comprehensive exams, but I studied, all these sources and came to realize exactly. And at this point, I had to translate half of the inscription. Only the first half, 611 was translated by an Egyptologist. I had to translate the second half of it. So in realizing this, that he wrote this proto-consonantal letter and this Canaanite syllabic, I saw that he was, number one, connected to Canaan somehow. Oh, and by the way, at the end of it, it says the beloved. So it says 611 Hebrews of Bethel, the beloved. And that's, of course, a reference to the beloved home city of the Asiatics, of Jacob's family.
Right.
That's where God instructed them to live, wouldn't you know, at Bethel before Joseph was taken off into slavery and Jacob moved his family to Egypt. So all of this kind of came together to make me realize, oh my, this is just a gold mine. And I came to realize then that because this proto-consonantal letter, in fact, it's the oldest attested alphabetic letter in the world. And it dates to the 1840s BC. And it's written by Joseph's son. And that's when I came to realize, well, obviously, he and maybe his brother Ephraim in the background, in fact, probably Ephraim was the mastermind in the shadows, probably they together devised the Hebrew alphabet and then used it to start a Hebrew script for their uncles because Jacob required, essentially, Jacob stole Ephraim and Manasseh away from their father.
Right.
He said, as for your other children, they're yours, but these two are mine. And he was physically removing them from their home with mom and dad and resettling them with his uncles. And that was the stroke of genius that has led to our having the alphabet that we use today in English. Isn't that amazing?
So Joseph raised them as Egyptians because that, teaching them what he learned, obviously, you boys will, grow up, probably carry on the family business. Jacob then appropriated them and brought them into Goshen among the other Hebrews where they were living, which, by the way, was a stroke of genius on God's part because they were brought out of Canaan and then isolated from the surrounding Amorite culture, which they were being drawn into there. So kind of living in isolation, they developed into their own people where they would not then be absorbed by the dominant culture, either the Egyptian or the Amorite cultures around them. Now, again, where was this found? Was this text was found in the Sinai, and were other texts found around it?
Yes, lots of texts found around it from different eras. So this text dates to the Middle Kingdom, to Dynasty 12. I think 1842, if memory serves correct, is the right year. I have it in my book, all documented. I think it's 1842. And most of the other inscriptions that are there at that site date to later, to the New Kingdom. There's two texts that are contemporary that date to one to Dynasty 12 and one to Dynasty 13 that are nearby. And then there's kind of a cache, C-A-C-H-E, a cache of other inscriptions that date to a later period. That's the New Kingdom, and specifically Dynasty 18. Well, that's the dynasty of Amenhotep II. And these inscriptions are virtually all pessimistic, in contrast to the inscriptions that are from Dynasty 12 in Egypt and Sinai and Dynasty 13. And the reason they're pessimistic, of course, is because that's during the time when the Israelites have been taken under bondage and treated harshly. Kind of, to put it mildly, right? Just harshly. And so that's reflected in the tone in those later inscriptions. And these are full-blown Hebrew inscriptions. And what's amazing, Derek, is that you can see the progression in the style, the writing style of each of the letters as it's evolved, if you don't mind my using the term, from the 19th century BC until Moses' day, which is the 15th century BC. And in that evolution of the letters, they become more abstractly written, which makes perfect sense. Why? Well, if you have to make an elaborate picture, draw an elaborate picture for every letter you write,
Yeah.
Your work's cut out for you. My artistic talent stopped in about fourth grade.
Mm-hmm.
I can't draw, nice pictures so that people are going to interpret correctly what I'm drawing. Well, obviously, some of the Israelites would have had the same, issue. And to speed things up, the letters became more abstractly written. Look at our letters today. What is it when you write the letter A? It's like 2/3 of a triangle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's this crossbar in the middle. What does that mean? What's the meaning that connects that to anything with you? It is so abstract, it's lost its meaning of what it originally was as a letter. Well, that's the natural progression of things. So in those later Israelite or Hebrew inscriptions, you see this movement toward abstraction and how they write their letters. And then you contrast that from that time period where it's less pictographic, if you will, to how they write once they're in the land. It becomes the land of Israel, and you have the monarchy and all of that, the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom, and all the kings of Israel and Judah. In that era, it's even more abstractly written. And that is a perfect picture of what you would expect logically as a linguist.
Now, the way you lay it out and explain it, it seems like it's fairly obvious. So why hadn't anybody discovered this prior to you stumbling on this in the 21st century?
Well, that's a great question, Derek. I guess I'd answer it in two ways. Number one, the providence of God, that he would call upon me to be the one to do this work and to fall into this, as I refer to, one gold mine after another. But number two, you have to have all of the right training. And I don't think God has, if I'm wrong, correct me, I don't think God has risen up anyone who, I always refer to myself as being educated way beyond my intelligence. I have 3 master's degrees in addition to my BA, and then a PhD from what's known as Canada's flagship university, which is the University of Toronto. Well, all of that, credentials, at the end of the day, they don't mean so much, but it's what you learn in the process of becoming credentialed. That's the key. So I got to learn 3 years of Middle and Late Egyptian. Well, you have to have that kind of background in addition to all the archaeological background and the biblical languages background to be able to piece all of this together one at a time, one step at a time, one element at a time, and see how they all fit. So in God's sovereignty, he gave me this love for learning and sent me to all the right places so that I would have all the right training under all of the most incredible professors that I could have asked for or hoped for in life. And he kind of stirred the pot and then thrust me into this amazing set of discoveries.
Well, yeah, and amazing that I think some of it just involves knowing who to ask when you run across something that doesn't look right. Like you going to the expert then in the Canaanite, syllabics. There are a lot of scholars out there who seem to kind of like draw a box in the sand and say, okay, everything is going to fit inside this box, and anything that doesn't go inside the box, I'm just either going to ignore or explain away. And maybe that's just me being skeptical, looking at it as a layperson who's not involved in the process of academia. What kind of response do you get from experts in Egyptian history or hieroglyphics or early Hebrew epigraphy? I mean, what sort of reaction did your book get when it came to market?
Well, I would say the answer is a pretty broad scope of, there's a range of responses. But one of the responses you actually alluded to yourself, which is a huge part of scholarship completely ignores my work. And there's a sense in which that's both the greatest compliment that you could pay me, but it's also a terrible commentary. If you are a leading scholar in a field and somebody comes up with what he or she is claiming to be groundbreaking research, it behooves you, you're required as an expert in your field to delve into it deeply and to evaluate it and to compare that with what you've come to believe and to put your beliefs, your convictions, and even what you've put in print as a scholar who publishes, to put it on trial and say, has what I've always believed about this or taught about this, is it correct? And are these proclaimed, self-proclaimed, if you will, new discoveries and, groundbreaking work, research, do they have the element of truth to them? And at the end of the day, I've yet to see scholars objectively look carefully at my work, truly objectively. And let me give you an example of why this is the case, that it hasn't happened. Before my book hit came out of the printing press, which was in January of 2017, two scholars wrote 3 public articles two scholars wrote 3 public articles that denounced the thesis of my book. The thesis was that Hebrew is the language behind the world's oldest alphabetic script, and I translated 15 inscriptions in it. And of those, within those 15 inscriptions, 3 biblical characters are named, right? Which is just astounding.
Yeah.
I didn't plan it that way. It just happened that way. Well, how can you denounce, as a leading scholar in your field, how can you denounce the thesis of someone's book before you've even read the book? To me, Derek, that's astounding. And this is really, I think, the most vivid response to denounce it as incorrect without even giving it the time of day to read it for yourself.
I can't say I'm terribly surprised. My wife does have some experience in the academic field, and she saw a little bit of that in her field, which is molecular biology. But that is not surprising, I think, when you find somebody who makes a career as the guy for, fill in the blank. And here comes a theory that blows that basically opens a new window into that field. It's like, well, perhaps a little bit of professional embarrassment. Why didn't I see this? Because it's not like, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not like these scholars or these inscriptions that you translated were newly discovered. Am I right?
Right. And, back to finishing the answer to your question, Egyptologists really haven't delved too deeply, because only one inscription, that caption on what's called Sinai 115, that's pretty much the extent of the Egyptian inscriptions that I deal with in that book. So they haven't weighed in virtually at all. They've kept quiet, the Egyptologists. But you asked about the scholars in the field of epigraphy, of ancient Hebrew writings. Well, none of the scholars who has weighed in on this is an expert in the Proto-Consonantal alphabet. They've I don't know how much they've studied, but they've published absolutely nothing on all of the inscriptions that are extant, that date to Egypt's New Kingdom. Again, that's the middle of the 2nd millennium BC, and then Egypt's that's the New Kingdom, and then the Middle Kingdom, which dates earlier to the first half of the 2nd millennium BC. They don't even have expertise in the area where they've critiqued me and criticized me. And, it's kind of like, what I told you before. When I realized I was behind on 200 years of scholarship, I didn't go out and publish something. I didn't say that somebody's incorrect about anything. I didn't, verbally refute someone's position. I went and studied and caught up on that scholarship. Why didn't any of them catch up on the scholarship of the Proto-Consonantal alphabetic inscriptions? They didn't do that. They just denounced this as incorrect. So if you're going to be someone who is the person who is known as the authority on a certain position, you'd better be willing to do your homework, and you'd better be willing to put your view on trial. And this is another entire issue that you reminded me of with what you said. Think of the conflict that you face as a scholar who is a recognized authority in a field. And you've published various articles or books or whatever, and you've made allusions to how this happens to be true or that happens to be true. And now somebody is publishing something that completely refutes that. What does it do? It makes you realize, the public out there is going to see me, if I stand up and say, well, I was wrong about all of this, then you look pretty foolish.
Mm-hmm.
How many scholars are willing to take their professional pride and let it, sink to the floor, to the ground? Not many. Why? Because as your wife must know, once you get into the world of academia, it's all about what you know and the perception of what you know and people's opinion of how much you know. And scholarly pride takes over, and all of a sudden it's a trap, and you're no longer willing to be an objective learner anymore. And at the end of the day, Derek, for me as a professor, I want to be, I don't even like the adjective. I'll use the verb. I want to humble myself enough as an action to say, I'm willing to admit I'm wrong if I'm wrong on something, prove I'm wrong. There's something in my book that's wrong, that a fellow Christian scholar came to me and said, well, I think this is wrong, and I think this certain passage in the Bible shows that it's wrong. And I said, that's strange. Let me research it. So I researched it, and sure enough, he's absolutely right. Well, if there's ever a second edition of my book, I can guarantee you that will be corrected. Why? It's not enough that I said it once and it has to be always true. I want to be right? Even if it takes admitting I was wrong before I can take the new view that shows that that's the right view.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the correct approach, because people will find it, I think, easier long-term to put stock in what you say if you're willing to step back and say, okay, new evidence has presented itself, or better analysis has been made known to me. And so therefore I'm going to have to rethink my position and change my position on certain issues. One of the things that you mentioned, and this is in a paper that you shared with me on the length of the Israelites' sojourn in Egypt, which is one of those things I'm probably going to have to rethink after I finish reading it, that the historicity of Moses is confirmed outside the Bible. Again, this is something I would think that we would hear from Bible teachers, from Hebrew scholars, everywhere. But this is the first time I remember seeing this anywhere on a text called Sinai 361. What is it? Where was it found? And in what context was Moses' name mentioned?
So that was found in one of the turquoise mines at Serebit el-Khadim. And this is, I guess you could call it, just to the southwest of central Sinai. That's where it's located. And it mentions Moses' name. And, when I was translating in the process, I deciphered all the letters, and now is in the process of separating the words, because in that text of that time, not only did they have no vowels, did they write no vowels, but they had no punctuation and no spaces between words. I had to figure out where a word starts and where a word ends, right?
Can make some big changes, yeah.
Because they write no vowels, think about it.
Yeah.
If you write DG as a word, Derek, you could say, oh, that's dig. No, that's Doug. No, that's dog. And maybe on and on. You can add a vowel at the end and have 4 letters. So there's all kinds of options. So really, you're kind of at the mercy of the author at that point, who he knows what he wrote, but you now have to be the Sherlock Holmes and essentially turn over every stone to try to figure it out. So in that inscription, when I was in the process of translation, when it hit me that the right consonants were there to translate the word Moses, you know what I did? I went the other direction. I said, I'm going to be a skeptic here. I'm going to try to prove that this could be one of the other words that has that combination of consonants. I'm going to try to prove that it's one of those other options before I even entertain the thought for myself, because it can't be Moses, right? I took that tact, and I went through, and of course my wife calls me a grammar Nazi. I don't know if that's a fair term to use, but there's truth to it.
I'm married to one too, so no worries.
Good. She will understand and appreciate this then. So I looked at every option grammatically in Hebrew with what that could be in a way that interprets it as a different word, whether that's grammatically different, such as, noun, verb, adjective, preposition, etc., or anything else that I could come up with. And there literally none of the other options that's conceivable for that combination of letters. None of the other options works grammatically in that context. Only a noun works. And it only works if it's Moshe, which is the Hebrew name for Moses. So that's when I came to realize, I have no other option here. This is Moses. And you know what? It fit perfectly with the inscription. It talked about the amazing, the wondrous works that were performed in this year of amazing works. So that inscription is absolutely mind blowing.
Wow!
Because it now is on an inscription that dates to the middle of the 15th century BC in mines that can be dated from the pottery there. Literally, the pottery dates, and you'll like this for precision, the pottery dates to the reigns of Thutmose III and Amenhotep II. Mm-hmm. Well, Thutmose III, I've proven in my 2006 article on the Exodus Pharaoh, he's the father of the Exodus Pharaoh. He ruled into his 54th year. He qualifies as the predecessor of the Exodus Pharaoh who rules over 40 years. Mm-hmm. And, of course, Amenhotep II is the Exodus Pharaoh himself. So isn't it amazing that the synchronization lines up absolutely perfectly to connect that inscription from a mine that dates to the reigns of Thutmose III, mm-hmm. the Pharaoh who kicked Moses out of Egypt, and his son, the Exodus Pharaoh. Wow.
And I should have been watching Tim Mahoney's website more carefully, because he's got an article on Sinai 361 and the Moses inscription at his website, patternsofevidence.com. Mm-hmm. So I guess I must have been distracted by a shining object or something. One final thing, and I could definitely continue this conversation for the better part of the evening, but for the benefit of listeners to just try to keep these conversations to manageable length, one of the more fascinating aspects of this period of history is the second intermediate period. For listeners who may not be familiar with that, and the Hyksos rulers of Egypt, what is significant about their rule, and how does their role in Egypt fit with the Israelite sojourn?
That's a great question. And Derek, I'm going to have to give you the Reader's Digest version for your listeners' sake here. But I would say this. First of all, these Asiatics who settle at Avaris, no doubt about it, they settle there in the 12th dynasty. That's, again, the first half of the 19th century BC. The Hyksos, they don't settle in Egypt until the 17th century BC. So whoever the Asiatics are that have been there, that have been there at Avaris before the Hyksos arrived, there's somebody different than the Hyksos. Well, guess what? The Israelites are the ones, and they fit perfectly according to biblical chronology. The Hyksos, of all places, where did they make their hub? Well, it was at the perfect location. It was the port city. It was the entrance into Egypt, or the exit through Egypt to connect you to Europe or to Asia. It was the bridge. It was the perfect location. That's where the Hyksos moved to. But they were warring people, unlike the herdsmen of the Israelites. All they had is sheep and goats, and they took care of their flocks, and they were pretty simple people. But when the Hyksos arrived, they decided they're going to invade Egypt and they're going to take over. So they conquered pretty much all of Lower Egypt and into Middle Egypt. And of course, they drove the native Egyptians out of that area. And the native Egyptians, of course, had to go further to the south, which is uphill or upstream, up the Nile, because the Nile flows south to north, mm-hmm. believe it or not. And that being the case, then for about 108 years, according to the Turin Royal Canon, which is a very ancient document that lists the different reigns of dynasties and the kings and so forth of these dynasties. It says they ruled for 108 years, which takes you, actually 1668 is the year I have for their arrival, and that would be 1560 when they're booted out of Egypt. Mm-hmm. And what happens is the native Egyptians, who kind of begin a new dynasty, if you will, it's called Dynasty 17, a new ruling family, at Thebes, which is, again, upstream up the Nile. And they start to branch out. They start kind of getting some swagger. And they realize, hey, we can compete now with the Hyksos, and let's work at getting them out of here. So it was a decades-long process to push themselves to the north, downhill, and invade and capture and regain some of that land that was lost to the Hyksos. And then Avaris, their capital, is invaded. The Hyksos lose Avaris, and most of them are killed in the battle. And the survivors, they shack up in Canaan, right, in the southern Levant, at a place called Sharuhen. And ancient Egyptian historical sources tell us that they lived there for 3 years. And after 3 years, the Egyptians invaded their site at Sharuhen and wiped them out. They finished the job that they had been working on for decades and had essentially completed, at least in Egypt, 3 years earlier. Well, that being the case, all of a sudden, everything makes perfect sense when you open up the beginning of Exodus 1, Derek, because it says in verse 8 that a new king arose over Egypt who did not know of Joseph. New king arose. Well, all of the kings of the 12th dynasty knew of Joseph. All the kings of the 13th dynasty knew of Joseph because they were centered in the Nile Delta up in the north. All of the Hyksos kings of the 15th dynasty knew of Joseph. Why? Because they moved into the city where his family was living. Well, the 17th dynasty pharaohs are from Thebes, and when they take over in the north, their last 17th dynasty king becomes the first 18th dynasty king. His name is Ahmose. Ahmose is the king who arose who did not know of Joseph. He's the perfect guy. Why? Because living in the south, he never would have heard of Joseph because his family had been there for, way over a century, if not centuries. And he invades the north. And all of a sudden he says to himself, these numerous Israelites who didn't fight us from Avaris when the Hyksos were repelling our invasions, what if they were to join themselves to whom? To their enemies. That's what the biblical text says.
Right.
Who are the enemies? Well, it's the Hyksos who had shacked up at Sharuhen in Canaan for 3 years. What if they join themselves to the Hyksos, come back and fight against us, beat us, and then leave? Now we've lost all of our manpower and everything that could be used to help bring Egypt back to a better state after the civil war. We would lose it all, and we would lose it in the war, so we would be decimated as people. We would be a shadow of our former selves if this would happen. So rather than seeing the Israelites recruit the Hyksos to join them in battling against them, they put them under slavery in the middle of the 16th century BC.
Fascinating stuff. And again, when you begin to see into that world and begin to get a sense for what the patriarchs and then the prophets knew, the Old Testament really opens up. I like the way you described it before we began earlier in the conversation, that it's like suddenly going from a black and white, like that scene in Wizard of Oz where it suddenly goes from black and white to full color. It's a huge difference. Your book, The World's Oldest Alphabet, is it available? And if so, where can we get a copy?
I'd love to be able to tell you exactly how to get a copy, but a few months ago, and so that would have been spring of 2020, right about the time of the coronavirus issue, it went out of print completely. I don't know, maybe some people had more time to read and they bought the copies that were still in existence. So it's now completely out of print. My publisher, Carta in Jerusalem, has told me that they will reprint my first book once my second book's manuscript has been submitted to them. And that's the companion volume I've been working on all summer. And I'm hoping by the end of 2020 to have it completed, to turn into them. So hopefully my first book will be reprinted, but the second book is going to be amazing. It's called Origins of the Hebrews. And basically, it's going to get into all the areas that I've talked about with you. All of this evidence to connect us with the Israelites of the Bible in the time that the Bible says that they were there. And of course, liberal scholars tell us, we have no evidence of this. So really, it's become a laughing stock in universities. And I've seen it myself. I've seen university professors who mockingly criticize the Bible because there's no evidence of the Exodus or the Israelites living there for 430 years like the Bible says they did. So this book ushers in a new day, and it gives you well-researched discoveries that will demonstrate how powerful the connection is between the Bible, the history in the Bible of Genesis and Exodus, how well that connects with ancient Egyptian history. So keep an eye out for that book in 2021, hopefully.
Well, we will certainly will stay in touch with you. And if we don't talk again before then, we definitely will have you back to discuss that book and let people know about it. Again, I will point out that your work was featured in Patterns of Evidence, the Moses Controversy, the film that was released by Tim Mahoney back in March. He's got the new one out now on the Red Sea Crossing, which was just released as just a few days ahead of this recording. It is an exciting time to be alive because more evidence is coming out and being made available to people in the pews, which is really necessary in this day and age. So, Doug, really appreciate your work and appreciate you taking time out of your writing schedule to share some time with us.
I've really enjoyed it, Derek. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the listeners who are interested in this topic and fascinated and really desiring to learn more. And that's what I am. And so I'm with you.
Coming up, will it be Tom Horn's last conference presentation ever? He says it will. Tell you about that, and another conference goes virtual. Details straight ahead as A View from the Bunker continues.
Unveiling the ancient realms of demonic kings and Satan's battle plan for Armageddon. Skywatch TV is proud to announce 2 new special offers. The Veneration Collection with optional Red Wing Saga series. Sold separately, this exclusive offer retails for $90. Yours now for only $35 plus shipping and handling. But wait, now you have the option to upgrade and expand your collection by including all 5 previously released books in the Red Wing Saga. The expanded collection, which includes all 8 books and the Search for the Rephaim DVD documentary, holds a retail value of $190. Yours now for your donation of only $100 plus shipping and handling. So don't delay. Order the Veneration Collection with optional Red Wing Saga series now. Available at skywatchtvstore.com or call 1-844-750-4985.
Driving the internet to think for more than 10 years. This is A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Join us online every week. Sunday night, 7 p.m. Central Time is when we release new podcasts. You'll find them at vftb.net, Spreaker.com, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, all, sorts of other places, wherever fine podcasts are sold, actually. The easiest way to keep up with us is to download our free mobile app. It's available for Android and iOS devices. We have links to those app stores. Again, it's free. And you'll find it at vftb.net. Online, social media, Twitter, at ViewFromBunker or at Derek Gilbert. And remember, the first name spelled D-E-R-E-K. And you'll find us on Parler.com as well, Parler.com, under the handle Derek P. Gilbert. The Defender Conference launches August 27th at 2 p.m. Central Time. That's UTC minus 5, I think, now that we're on daylight savings. This will be not on a schedule like some other virtual conferences have been, where the presentations are released on a time schedule. We're trying something a little different. We're launching them like Netflix launching a new season where you can binge watch it all at once. Now, seeing as how there's 2 conferences worth of presentations, because all of last year's conference presentations are available at the same time as all of this year's conference presentations, you'll have a lot of video watching to do. 90 days from the date of release, so August, that's September, October. You'll have basically until Thanksgiving or thereabouts to watch these conference presentations from the likes of Pat Boone, Rabbi Jonathan Kahn, Joel Richardson, Steve Quayle. And I was honored to sit in on the recording of Steve Quayle's presentation. We did that, in fact, here in the bunker earlier today, so I got a chance to see it. It will blow your mind. Tom Horn, of course, and he is saying that this will be his last conference presentation. And Josh Peck, Drew Graffia sat in on that one. And I've heard Josh editing the presentation down. It's going to be a dynamite presentation. So between Tom and Steve, you're going to have your head blown. My presentation, I think, in my humble opinion, content rich. Sharon's presentation, which we recorded here at the bunker. More dynamic material from Sharon as she delivers a message on Psalm 91. Which is the soldier's psalm. Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, Dr. Michael Lake, Dr. Michael Heiser, of course, bringing some real content-rich stuff. Yaakov Buyans, Rabbi Jonathan Kahn. That's the Jonathan I was trying to think of earlier. This is a conference not to miss. And again, we're adding all of last year's conference presentations as well. So you get 2 for the price of 1. You can find out more and sign up today at defenderconference.com. Now, this goes through Vimeo. Okay, so when you sign up, it will take you to a Vimeo page. You will need to set up a Vimeo account, which is free. But once this is released August 27th, you'll have access to it'll be something like 45 presentations. So plenty of material to watch over the next 3 months. The Warrior Summit and Retreat, Jamie Walden is putting this together. This is set for the first weekend in September 4th through 6th at High Hill Christian Camp in High Hill, Missouri. As of now, that is still on. He's been in contact with the camp organizers there, and they say things are still open, and they plan to keep things open. So we hope you join us for a weekend of rest, refreshment, and fellowship. OmegaDynamics.org is Jamie's website. You can find out more about the Warrior Summit and Retreat that weekend. OmegaDynamics.org. We'll be there with Dr. Michael Lake. Forgive me. Dr. Lake had to beg off. He's got a lot of construction work going on in his new facility in Seymour, Missouri. Coach Dave, Jamie Walden, Dr. Mike Spalding, Tim Alberino, and Bob Griswold will be there, along with Mike Kerr and Jeannie Moore. And Sharon and I hope to see you there. The Nephilim Again Conference. This is the one that we just learned over the weekend will be virtual. This is the conference organized by Russ Dizdar and L.A. Marzulli. Drew Graffia, our colleague from Skywatch TV, and I were planning to be there. Now this will be a virtual conference. This will launch September 18th. You can find out more as more information becomes available at NephilimAgain.com. I know that Gary Stearman and Chief Joseph Riverwind were planning to contribute video presentations anyway. Well, now all of us will be contributing video presentations. The Nephilim Again Conference, once again, going virtual due to travel restrictions from across the country. In fact, we've seen now that the state of Missouri, in which we live, has been put on the restricted lists for the state of New York and city of Chicago. So if we try to travel through Chicago or to the state of New York, we're supposed to self-quarantine. So we'll see how things develop as we get deeper into the fall. This has affected a number of conferences. Obviously, we told you previously about the East Coast Prophecy Conference, which was scheduled in the same area as the Nephilim Again Conference. Both of them were scheduled for the Columbus, Ohio area. And the East Coast Prophecy Conference from Southwest Radio Ministries has been canceled. As of now, the Future Vision 2020 Conference from Prophecy Watchers, which is scheduled for October 22nd through 25th at the Colorado Springs Marriott, is still on. So we pray that one will come together. That's one that we're really looking forward to. L.A. Marzulli, Bill Salas, Tommy Ice, Tim Alberino, Carl Teichribb, Ken Johnson, Dr. Michael Lake, Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, Bill Koenig, Claudia Koenig, and of course our friends from Prophecy Watchers, Gary Stearman, Bob Ulrich. As of now, still on. We shall see what transpires as we get deeper into the summer here. And then in November, Hear the Watchman, putting on another conference in Orange County, California, coming back to the Hilton Irvine at the Orange County Airport, November 5th through 8th. This is going to be another great lineup. L.A. Marzulli, Bill Salas, Pastor Paul Begley, Gans Shimura. Looking forward to seeing Gans again. David Heavener, Jamie Walden, Joni Stahl, Michael Boldea, and of course Sharon and me. That's November 5th through 8th. And you'll find out more online at hearthewatchmen.com. And I hear from Mike Kerr that they're putting together a virtual conference between now and then as well. So we'll give you more details on that as soon as we can. And then next spring, look for the Decoding the Supernatural Conference. This will be Sharon and me, L.A. Marzulli, and Jeff Jansen of Global Fire Ministries. That's Murfreesboro, Tennessee, near Nashville. We'll tell you more as we get deeper into the year on that. And as of now, our tour of Israel for next spring still available. From what we're hearing from folks over there, they expect things to be opened up by fall, but certainly by next spring at the latest. We pray that that is true. And our schedule for the tour, April 18th through May 1st, across the land of Israel with an optional 3-day extension in Jordan. Take advantage of that, because seeing Petra is a once-in-a-lifetime experience. It is mind-blowing. You might have seen it in the film Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Trust me, seeing it even in a theater on the big screen does not do Petra justice. When you're surrounded by it, 360 degrees, there's just no comparison, even to seeing it on the big screen. And of course, we'll be teaching all along the way and explaining why Petra is more significant spiritually than we might have been taught. And it's not just because there are some who believe that may be where God shelters the remnant of Israel during the Great Tribulation. There's a history there as well that is not well known, and we will talk about that in Jordan when we're there on the QT, because, well, frankly, Muslims won't like it very much. More information on the Skywatch TV tour of Israel online at skywatchinisrael.com. That's skywatchinisrael.com. Again, you'll find us online at Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever else fine podcasts are sold. A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House and released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Our opening theme is Iron Bacon by Kevin MacLeod. His website is incompetech.com. Our announcer is D.C. Good. Next week, a guest I haven't had the opportunity, the pleasure of talking with in 6 years, Lars Walker, author of a number of books that I highly recommend. Fiction author, but weaves a lot of truth into the fiction, like my good wife, Sharon K. Gilbert. He's the author of a series that deals with Norse history, Norse cosmology, but written through the lens of biblical truth. Don't miss it. It will be of great interest, especially if you appreciate history. Lars Walker, next Sunday night, August 9th, 2020, here on A View from the Bunker. Remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.